Okay, so you are going to first have a crack at programming now. We're going to take you through the steps. So in order to be able to do that, I want you to make sure that you have a Google Colab window open. I'm sharing with you my Google Colab window. You're going to type stuff in and try it out for yourselves. At any point in time, you can pause this video and try out what I've been, talking about and make sure that you could have it working on your own. So the first thing I want to point out is, just on the slides, I had been talking about the title. So right here, you can rename the notebook. Just double click on it and then you can type in anything you want. Please notice that the extension .ipynb should stay as is, but you can upload it there. If you want to upload or download certain notebooks, then the way you would do that is you could do File. And then if you have a notebook that you want to upload from your computer, you can say upload notebook, and then it will give you access to your computer so you can actually upload something from there. You can open a notebook that you have already up in the Google Cloud, and you can download a notebook, right? So you could download it as a .ipynb, which is downloading it as a Python notebook, or you could download it as a .py. The .py extension tells you that it's a Python file. So once again, this would be a Python notebook that would look something like that, and this would be just the code, just the Python code. Okay, so comments. So notice here you have two main things. We'll talk about these at some later time, but for right now, you have two. These are each within a Google Colab. Each of these separate boxes are called cells. So you could either have a code cell or a text cell. This first one is a text cell. So if I double click on it, right, this is where you would be typing in. If you want to add a new code cell, you just do that and you can start. Actually, I did a code cell and you could do a new text cell. You can see the code cell is going to have that arrow in it, which is going to allow you to run it. I'm actually going to delete the extra code cell that I created. And then this is a new text cell that you could double click and type anything that you want in there. So going back to what I ran over here, so at the end of the slides, I shared with you a place where you can look up some information about what this markdown box in. Okay, so if you see, just for starters, things that I've used. So notice, right? So here, I'm going to call this title 1. And you can see down here what it's actually going to show up. So the single hashtag is going to create a larger title. Then a double hashtag is going to be smaller. If you put something in as a triple hashtag, or I'll make it even worse. So this is even smaller. And it will show you what's going to go on. You can put in ticks, and then notice now what I want is I want the actual pound symbol to come out. And that is since that has a meaning in the markdown language, if you actually want the pound symbol to show up, then you have to put a slash beforehand. The slash beforehand tells the markdown, don't treat this as a special character, treat it as an actual character that you want printed to the screen. So notice what would happen if I take away that slash. It's going to just turn it into a title, as opposed to if I put that slash back in, then it's going to actually show you that hashtag comment. And what this is the way I'm using these commenting is teaching you about something before I'm actually showing you it in use. Okay, so that's enough about Markdown for now. You can play around with that. This is going to be the first Python program that you're actually going to write. So this is a code cell that I've created here. So within a code cell, one of the ways to identify a comment is by putting the pound sign first. So it's not going to try and run that code. By convention, very frequently in different programming languages, when you learn how to code, one of the first things that you do is you run a hello world comment. I don't know exactly how that started, but the idea is to get the program to write hello world back to you. So within Python, it's simply done by running the print command. So that's the word print, open paren, and then whatever you want printing back to be put out within quotes, and then close. And then notice the comment line. So this is the beginning of a comment. It could either go at the beginning of the line or it can go afterwards, and anything following that hashtag on the line will be a comment, and it won't try and run it. So you could run it either by executing that. The first time you run it, it's actually connecting to a server, and so it might take a little bit longer to run. You don't have to worry about it. All subsequent ones are all going to be to run fairly quickly. Okay, so this is just another code. Notice here I'm showing you all the different, right? So this is the first programming class. This is a subtitle and a subtitle. Okay, getting into Python. So what I'm going to be teaching you now is I've introduced these concepts as general programming concepts, and now I'm going to show you how to do them in Python itself. So your elementary data types, right? So you can have integers and floats. Those are your basic numbers. You can have your Booleans, a string value that represents text. A list is some kind of ordered sequence of values. And then Python knows the type of variable that you're creating based upon the value that you're putting within those variables. Okay, so quotes, you know already, is going to give you a string. Brackets actually gives you a list. Parentheses is more of a like how you call a function. Curly brackets, so on and so forth. As you learn the different variable types, you'll learn how to create them. And this we covered, right? So if you're using a variable, you have the identifier, which is the name of the variable, and you have the value, and then the equal sign is what's going to actually take the value that you're putting and place it in the variable name. So here, lives is my identifier or my name of my variable, and 3 is the value that I'm putting into lives. So the variable names, just a few rules. They can contain only numbers and letters and underscores. They have to start with a letter or an underscore, but it cannot start with a number. Spaces aren't allowed, right? So if you want to have more than one word in your variable name, you should either do it, separate them by capitals, right? Or by separate words separated by underscores. And you should strongly avoid using Python keywords and function names. For example, the only one name that you've learned so far is print. That is a function name that you want to be able to use. And they should be fairly short, but descriptive. This is some of the keywords that you will have in Python. It's not an exhaustive list, right? And as in is, try, if, so on and so forth. As you go along, you'll be learning different keywords, and try and avoid using these words as variable names. Okay, so a variable has to be defined before it can be used. So here, right, so there's two new things here. One is, this is, right, so if I just, right, so this is very similar to what we did before, right? Hi, my name is. If you ran that, that's just going to print it to the screen. But now what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to print out a variable before I have given it a value. Okay, so So if I try and run this, right, the first thing it's going to do, it's going to print hi, my name is. And then it's going to try and run here, and it's telling you, you can't do that because name has not yet been defined. In this case, this would also not work. The only way this would work is if I put quotes around it, because then it knows that it's a string that I'm trying to put in here. So the correct way to run that was first define a variable name, assign it a string value, and now I can print it out. And I'm also adding something to my print. I'm putting a comma between two values that I'm printing. So the first thing it's going to do is going to print out this actual string. And the comma is telling me I have something more that I want to print. And now it's printing it out name. But name has now been predefined as a variable. The variable has the value of this string of aardvark. So when I print it out, you could print out, hi, my name is, and then it's going to print out the value of name. So here's what I want you to do on your own. Open up a new code box and store a message and a value in a variable, and then print out that message. So something similar to what we did just here. Just go ahead and try that for yourselves. So I'm just going to continue, but on your own, you should pause this and you should actually try and do this. So that's right. So what we've created here, we're going to come back to strings, but what you saw briefly here was name is a variable. The type of variable that is it's a string. I put a string in my variable name, and then I printed it out and accessed that variable name. So now I want to cover numbers, right? So numbers, the two types of numbers that we're going to be looking at are integers and floats. So integer is a positive or a negative number without a floating point or without a decimal point, whereas a float is going to have a decimal point. So here I'm calling one variable name my int, and I'm putting it into the integer 10. And then I'm creating a second variable called my float. And in that, I'm putting in the float number 5.64. And then I can print my int and my float. And that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing 10 is my int and 5.64 is the float. What you can do is you can convert from a float to an int and from an int to a float. And so the float function takes the integer and turns it into a float. And the int function takes the float variable and turns it into an int. What I want you to be aware of is when the function float turns an integer into a float, it just puts on a decimal place followed by a 0 because you don't have information about what the decimal place would be. But on the flip side, when you take a float number and you turn it into an integer, what it does is it just truncates the number at the decimal place, right? So here I'm doing my second print. So this first print is coming from here. The second print is coming from my float int and my int float, right? So 10.0 is taking the integer 10 and turning into a float to 10.0, and taking the float 5.64, truncating it at the decimal place and just ending up with a 5 in the end. So when you are assigning a value and using a variable to add to the value, you need to know that it evaluates the right-hand side of the statement before it does the assignment. So in this case, I'm assigning a new variable name of value. I'm putting in it the value of 7. Then what I do here is the first thing it does, it says value. Okay, that already exists and it has a value of 7. So this value here becomes 7. I'm adding 1 to it and putting it back into value. So now value has the value of 8, which is what I'm printing out and you're seeing here. Okay. Mathematical operators, right? So you can do add as expected with the addition side, subtract, multiply, divide, That gives you, that does an exponent for you, an integer division, and then a modulus. So what we'll talk about, you'll see examples of what this done, but just as a high level, an integer division, it will do division, and it will just respond back to you with the whole integer value, okay? As opposed to a modulus, which will not respond back with what the integer is. Instead, it's going to respond back to you with the remainder. Okay, let's see that in action. So the first thing I'm going to do is, instead of doing a single assignment, I'm going to do a multiple assignment. I'm saying A is equal to B is equal to C, and they're all equal to 0. So if I do print ABC, right, so that's my 0, 0, 0. I could then take B and C and assign totally new values to them. And then when I print it out, A, which did not get a new value, is going to remain 0. B now is going to have the value of 1, and C is going to have the value of 2. This is another way to do multiple assignments, right? So notice in this case, I'm assigning all to 0. Here, I'm assigning both X and Y. I have two new variables. One is getting assigned a 3, so my X is getting assigned a 3, and my Y is getting assigned a 2. Now I can see what happens when I do the add. So this is printing X plus Y, that's my 5. I'm printing the subtraction of X minus Y, right? So that's a 1. X times Y is a 6, right? 2 times 3 is 6. X divided by Y is X divided by Y is 1.5. And then X to the Y, or 3 squared, is 9. And now this is the two that you might be a little bit less familiar with, right? So this is an integer division. So whereas 3 divided by 2 gave you to a 1.5, when you ask for the integer division, it's only going to pass you back the 1, the full integer, and that's the one that's being printed here. And then modulus is the remainder. So if we let's make this a little bit more interesting. Let's do, I don't know, 9 divided by 2, right? So my integer division is going to give me a 4, because 9 divided by 2 would be 4.2. And my modulus, my remainder, is still just going to be 1. I can print it as a negative X, and that's my minus 9. And then ABS, this is a new and different function, and that an absolute value. So you can ask for an absolute value number, and that's what you're seeing. So an absolute value of minus 9 is going to still be a 9. Here, right, so once again, I'm assigning 3 and 2. When I turn 3.9 into an integer, I'm getting my 3. My float of X, right, is going to be my 3.2. And then I can add the 2 together. And whereas here, when I was adding them, I was just printing it out. Now I'm adding the 2 variables together and storing it in a third variable. So my X plus Y, my 3 plus 2, is getting to be a 5, and then I could print out Z as a separate variable. The order of operations, this is no different than how it is. It follows the PEMDAS rule, right? So parentheses first, and then exponents, absolute value or square roots, right? It's from left to right. M and D from PEMDAS stands for multiplication and division, is from left to right. And addition and subtraction are also left to right. So 2 plus 3 times 4, right? So it's going to do, well, let me print out each one separately so that you see the difference in the values. Right? So this is first going to do 3 times 4, which is 12, plus 2 is 14. When I enforce the addition first, by putting it within parentheses. So then I'll get 5 times 4, and that's 20. The purpose of Python is not to be teaching you math, but I just want you to be aware that when you're programming your math, you need to keep it in mind. What I like to say is, rather than having to remember all these alternate order of operations, if you know that you want something to happen first, put it in parentheses and just remember that the inner parentheses happened first. It also makes it a lot clearer for anybody looking at your code. Okay, floats, right? If you add together 2 floats, you're going to get a float. Right? And if you multiply a float, so this is acting exactly as you would expect it to happen. What is interesting about integers and floats is anytime you divide, you're always going to get a float back. So here, if I divide 4 divided by 2, I'm dividing 2 integers. My answer is going to be a float, okay? If you mix integers and floats, you'll always get a float. So here I'm mixing the integer 1 and the float 2.0, and I'm getting 3.0. Here I'm mixing it as an exponent. Once again, I'm going to get 9.0. So any kind of mathematical operation that you do on mix and floats, on integers and floats, if there's at least one float, your answer is going to be as a float. And the idea is it doesn't want to lose information. And this is just a point of interest. Sometimes weird things happen. You don't have to worry about it, right? So 0.2 plus 0.1, you would think it would just be 0.3. And for some reason, there's this extra character at the end of it. You haven't done anything wrong. You haven't done anything weird. It's just an oddity that exists. One more thing that I want to mention before we move away from floats and integers, and that's when you're writing really long numbers, Python allows you to write it out with underscores underneath it, right? So here, if you just had merged this all together, it would be a lot harder to read, like just when you're reading it yourself, but internally it knows that's as long as there's no quotes around the outside of it, it knows that that's just a number. And you can see that I'm doing the assignment here to universe age. Actually, I should not call that. Let's just, doesn't really matter. And then I am printing it out and adding one to it. Okay, so go ahead and try this for yourself. Write a new, so open a new code box and then try and write addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division that each results in number 8.